Good. All right. It's official. Let's take the prayer, please. And let's begin. Master of all
worlds,
highest
power of merciful parent of compassion,
your presence,
eternal one, source of strength for us, as you have been for our ancestors. We very humbly acknowledge you.
What is our life
that you have done for great kindness to us?
Therefore,
we place our appeals before you,
so that you may forgive
and absolve us of all our failings. Let our faults never become a barrier between us and you. And may it be your desire to prepare our hearts to feel awe and love for you.
May you listen to
these words of ours,
and may you
open our incomprehensible hearts to the mysteries of your Torah. May our study be a source of pleasure for your own glory, like sweet incense. May you shower down upon us the light of our soul's source in all the ways we define ourselves. May the sparks of your holy servants, through whom you have revealed these words to the world, shine and sparkle.
May their merit,
their ancestors' merit, and the merit of their Torah,
their
innocence and their holiness, stand for us so as to prevent us from stumbling when we study these words.
And their merit
be illumined by what we study, as in the saying of the sweet singer of Israel,
Open my
eyes that I may gaze at the wonders of your Torah. May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. For it is the eternal and wisdom. It is from his mouth that knowledge and understanding shine forth.
Na 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 Right, good evening to everyone. We are on page 281 in our to see more people. And I just saw something here. 1 second, a little technical business here about trying to get some people into this thing here. Okay, I don't know what the story is here. Okay, fine, good. Let's go. And we're going to now go to the next piece in the story with Isaac and Rebecca in Philistine territory with Avimelech. And in order to actually appreciate what's going on here with the Zohar, we need to refresh ourselves, refresh our memory, whatever. Trying to get rid of this other thing now. Hey. And remember what the story actually is. So if somebody has the English translation, if you bear with it, I think it's important to read it, because we're going to have to see how the Zohar is paying attention to the text. So somebody have chapter 26 in Bereshit, in Genesis, that they can read out to us in a nice brisk way?
Yeah, I do.
Thank you.
You want to start from verse 1?
From verse 1, yeah.
Okay. There was a famine in the land, aside from the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Avimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. The Lord had appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I point out to you. Reside in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. I will assign all these lands to you and to your heirs, fulfilling the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your heirs as numerous as the stars of heaven, and assign to your heirs all these lands, so that all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your heirs, inasmuch as Abraham," turn the page, "obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my laws, and my teachings." So Isaac stayed in Gerar.
Okay, so one check just for a second. So just to repeat, emphasize what we know already. So his plan is to go out of the land of Israel, to go to Mitzrayim, to go to Egypt. God stops him, and God says, no, you have to stay in the land of Israel. Nevertheless, he's in this part of the land of Israel, which is occupied by the Philistines, not the Canaanites. And he stays there. And of course, we had a little discussion about this last time. What is the status of this territory vis-a-vis being part of the land of Israel? And it's a little mixed up, but and we'll come back to that later. But anyway, he's in this territory, which is understood by the Zohar to be kind of literally enemy territory, right? A territory that is run by people who represent bad stuff. Okay.
So Isaac stayed in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister," for he was afraid to say, "my wife," thinking, "The men of the place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful." When some time had passed, Avimelech, king of the Philistines, looking out of the window, saw Isaac fondling his wife Rebekah. Avimelech sent for Isaac and said, "So she is your wife. Why then did you say, 'She is my sister'?" Isaac said to him, "Because I thought I might lose my life on account of her." Avimelech said, "What have you done to us? One of the people might have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." Avimelech then charged all the people, saying, "Anyone who molests this man or his wife shall be put to death."
Okay, thank you. And let's pause again and let's take in these details. Now we know, as has been mentioned right at the very beginning of this text, that this is a similar episode to something that happened to Abraham and Sarah. And in fact, we have two episodes that happen in the life of Abraham and Sarah that are similar to each other. And now we have a third episode, this one happening with Isaac, which is also an echo of what happened twice with Abraham and Sarah. So what's going to happen is that these three episodes get mushed together, right? They get a little bit conflated. And since for the Zohar, that's not such a big problem, because actually the issue is this symbolic confrontation between the righteous person and the evil empire, right? And whether the righteous person is Abraham or Isaac is not fundamentally so different, although Abraham represents one kind of righteousness, Isaac another. And so that makes some of the conflation possible. The other thing is that with Abraham, we have an Egypt story, but we also have a Philistine Gerar story with the ruler of Gerar, Avimelech, the same name. We talked about that before, right? That could be the name of simply the generic name of the ruler. So we have that story with Abraham also being in Philistine territory and here. We know that in the Abraham stories, if we go back just for a second, let's go back to chapter 12 in Genesis. Okay, so we don't have to start from the very beginning of the chapter, or let's go to verse 14.
When Avram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. And because of her, it went well with Avram. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves, she-asses, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Avram. Pharaoh sent for Avram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her as my wife? Now here is your wife, take her and be gone." And Pharaoh put men in charge of him, and they sent him off with his wife and all that he possessed.
Good. So that's the story with Pharaoh. What we have here is there is an abduction, right? Pharaoh does take Sarah as wife, and then he is stopped from consummating his plans by God, and then he's very, very indignant and yells at Abraham and kicks him out, right? And that's what happens there. Now let's go to chapter 20. Verse 1.
Verse 1.
Yeah.
Avraham journeyed from there to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he was sojourning in Gerar, Avraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." So King Avimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him. But God came to Avimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are to die because of the woman that you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now Avimelech had not approached her. He said, "O Lord, will you slay people even though innocent? He himself said to me, 'She is my sister.' And she also said, 'He is my brother.' When I did this, my heart was blameless and my hands were clean." And God said to him in the dream, "I knew that you did this with a blameless heart, and so I kept you from sinning against me. That was why I did not let you touch her. Therefore, restore the man's wife. Since he is a prophet, he will intercede for you to save your life. If you fail to restore her, know that you shall die, you and all that are yours." Early next morning, Avimelech called his servants and told them all that had happened, and the men were greatly frightened. Then Avimelech summoned Avraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? What wrong have I done that you should bring so great a guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done to me things that ought not to be done." "What then," Avimelech demanded of Abraham, "was your purpose in doing this thing?" "I thought," said Abraham, "surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. And besides, she is in truth my sister, my father's daughter, though not my mother's, and she became my wife. So when God made me wander from my father's house, I said to her, 'Let this be the kindness that you shall do to me. Whatever place we come to, say there of me, he is my brother.'" Avimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Avraham, and he restored his wife Sarah to him. And Avimelech said, "Here, my land is before you. Settle wherever you please." And to Sarah he said, "I herewith give your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will serve you as vindication before all who are with you, and you are cleared before everyone." Avraham then prayed to God, and God healed Avimelech and his wife and his slave girls so that they bore children, for the Lord had closed fast every womb of the household of Avimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Avraham.
Okay. So here we have that second episode. And again, we have an abduction. And again, God tells, this time without any kind of afflictions or anything, he tells Avimelech to restore Sarah to Abraham. And again, we have the righteous indignation, right? So we have a lot of this common threads. This time, the endowing of Abraham with riches comes after Avimelech knows the truth. In the first time he gave, in the second time with Isaac, he gives him a lot of riches and wealth when they first come down, and he doesn't know yet what the true story is. We have a nice little touch here at the end when Avimelech restores Sarah to Abraham, and at the end he says, "Here I've given." I'm reading a different translation here. "I've given 1,000 weights of silver to your brother." Right? There's a little touch there. Is it being gracious or is he being sarcastic? Yeah, your brother. We know who he is. We know who Abraham is, but he said he was you said he was your brother. He said you were his sister. Okay, good. Here's some money for your brother. Right? So there's this kind of a reconciliation, a begrudging reconciliation. And he says also, "Here is my land in front of you. Live wherever you like." Right? Live wherever is good in your eyes. Okay, so he doesn't have the same kind of kicking him out that we had in the Egypt story, right? Now we come back to the Isaac story. Okay? So one of the big differences between the two first stories and this Isaac story is what happens to Rebecca. The answer is nothing. She is not abducted, right? She is not taken into Avimelech's palace. in the Egypt story with Abraham and Sarah and in the Philistine story with Abraham and Sarah, in both cases, Sarah is taken away from Abraham. And then God has to intervene. In this story with Isaac, that's not the way it works out. It's not God who reveals the truth to Avimelech or to Pharaoh. How does the ruler find out the truth?
He somehow sees through a magic window that the two of them are making whoopee.
Right? They're fooling around together. So it's a completely different kind of mechanism for bringing out this revelation, right? And then he is again, the righteous indignation comes out again, right? And he says, "What the heck do you think you're doing?" And Yitzchak says, "I lied because I thought you were going to kill me." Now, let's understand again, nobody has laid a hand on Rebekah except Isaac. Nobody has taken Rebekah, right? And look at verse 8 one more time. Verse 8, chapter 26. No, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Verse 8. When some time had passed, Avimelech came.
That's enough. When some time had passed. So there's a whole period of time where Isaac and Rebekah are living in peace in this Philistine territory. Nobody's bothering them. Nobody has harassed them to take Rebekah. And then we have that spicy way of Avimelech finding out the truth, because actually Isaac and Rebekah are living the good life, right? They're doing fine. Okay, and then Avimelech says, "Well, how long did you want to try your luck?" He says in verse 10. Right? What have you done? Somebody might have slept, might have taken your wife and slept. And he doesn't even say him, right? Somebody would have thought she's just an eligible woman and been interested in her. Just a little side point. How does Avimelech, what term does he use to say, well, somebody might have done something? Right? What's the Hebrew? Does anybody see the Hebrew? Len, what's the Hebrew? You have it in front of you? The Hebrew is Achad Ha'am. It says, Kim'at Shachav Achad Ha'am. Right? Where is it? Shachav Achad Ha'am et Ishtecha. It almost happened that Achad Ha'am slept with your wife. Achad Ha'am took his name from this verse. Right, Achad Ha'am was one of the great modern thinkers, Zionist thinkers in his own kind of way. You don't have to go into it, but he took that nom de plume. He took that writer's name for himself from this, kind of a little bit of a salacious thing, right? That he's Achad Ha'am, one of the people. Which sounds like I'm just one of the people, very humble, but watch out, one of the people that could sleep with your wife. Side point. Anyway, but none of this has happened, and none of this in any way has threatened Isaac. And then what's the next thing? That Avimelech, then verse 11, proclaims that this person is protected, right? Nobody should dare think of messing with them. Right? And then, now verse 12.
Isaac sowed in that land and reaped 100-fold the same year. The Lord blessed him, and the man grew richer and richer until he was very wealthy. He acquired flocks and herds and a large household, so that the Philistines envied him. And the Philistines stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of his father Abraham, filling them with earth. And Avimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you have become far too big for us."
Okay, so what's another major difference between those other stories with Abraham and Sarah, and here with Isaac and Rebecca in Gerar? Yeah, Len.
No, I had a side question. I believe 100-fold in the Hebrew is Mea She'arim.
Right.
And I've always been confused about the neighborhood in Jerusalem, Mea She'arim. Does it refer to this verse, or does it simply mean 100 gates, referring to something else?
It takes its name from this verse. It takes its name from this verse, and it means, increased blessing, so much good fortune, right? So that's the basic meaning. Although some Israelis have a kind of an Israeli joke. It's not the greatest joke. I take no responsibility for the joke, but they say Mea She'arim, the area of Mea She'arim is basically the size of 50 soccer fields. So 50 soccer fields each one has two goals. A shar is a goal. So they say it's Mea She'arim, so there's 100 goal goal sections there in Mea She'arim.
Thank you.
So anyway, back to here. What's the basic difference now again?
Well, here Isaac sticks around after the whole episode's over. He stays around.
Right. This is something again. This is very different than the parallels that we have from the Abraham and Sarah stories. There's no kicking out of Isaac and Rebecca once the truth is known that they are a married couple. They end up just like they were living in peace beforehand, before the truth came out. They are living in peace now after the truth came out, and actually they live and they thrive and they have everything. And the problem is no longer the dishonesty or the tricky situation of that they almost sinned with somebody's wife. Instead, we have just plain envy, that the Philistines are beginning to get impatient with this foreigner that is really succeeding so terrifically, right? And that's when he finally gets kicked out by Avimelech.
And also, he's a self-made man, that he doesn't receive gifts.
Right. So a good point. So that there is no, at this point yet, any largesse that's showered upon him by the ruler, right? Good, excellent. And so now he's getting. Oh, by the way, and we have this idea now with the first introduction of the motifs of the wells, right? They don't like him so much that they start harassing him, and they start stopping up the wells. Okay, let's just keep going a little bit more. 17.
So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the wadi of Gerar, where he settled. Isaac dug anew the wells which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, and which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham's death. And he gave them the same names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants digging in the wadi found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." He named that well Esek, because they contended with him. And when they dug another well, they disputed over that one also, so he named it Sitnah. He moved from there and dug yet another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he called it Rehoboth, saying, "Now at last the Lord has granted us ample space to increase in the land."
Okay, so now he's finally able to succeed without them harassing him anymore. And then he goes to Beersheba, which is out of Philistine territory. He builds an altar and he thanks God. Now 26.
And Avimelech came to him from Gerar with Ahuzat, his counselor, and Phicol, chief of his troops. Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you have been hostile to me and have driven me away from you?" And they said, "We now see plainly that the Lord has been with you, and we thought, let there be a sworn treaty between our two parties, between you and us. Let us make a pact with you that you will not do us harm, just as we have not molested you, but have always dealt kindly with you and sent you away in peace. From now on, be you blessed of the Lord. Then he made for them a feast, and they ate and drank.
Okay, so we'll stop. We get the message, I hope. So the back and forth with Avimelech is complicated, but it ends up not being so much about again, like I said, the relationship with Rebecca, but more about Isaac's success as a property owner, as a farmer, as a person who digs wells and has flocks of sheep and so on. I've mentioned it many times whenever we come to that Torah reading. This is not the picture of the wimpy, passive, Isaac that people like to talk about. Here we have him as being quite forceful and strong and decisive and successful, accomplished. And then we have a little bit of tension between Avimelech and Isaac because of that. And then finally, Avimelech comes and makes peace. And they strike a covenant with each other together, right? Okay, so all of this is background for, let's see now, how does the Zohar work out in its grand narrative and its kind of symbolic way of reading these stories. How does it work out the similarities and the differences between the Abraham stories and the Isaac story? So now that's where we are now at 281. The top paragraph there, the first full paragraph on the page, the verse, Avimelech commanded all the people, right there. So, Craig, you want to just continue, please, since you're doing such a great job today?
Oh, thank you so much. Avimelech commanded all the people, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife will surely be put to death. Come and see how patiently the Blessed Holy One tolerated the wicked on account of the kindness they extended to the ancient patriarchs. For due to this, Israel did not dominate them until many generations later. Avimelech acted worthily by showing kindness to Isaac, by saying to him, here, my land is before you, settle wherever you please.
Okay, so here we have praise for Avimelech. He was kind, he was magnanimous. And what are we talking about here when we say tolerating, that the Blessed Holy One tolerates the wicked? What's all that about?
On the face of it, it seems that as per the Zohar, Avimelech is still a wicked, no good Nick. It's just that in this one case, he did something nice, so punishment will be delayed.
All right, so what's the punishment exactly? Look at note 176. Oh, you know what? The note 76, you need note 175. Go ahead. You're muted.
Okay, 175. This is not its site. It does not dwell here.
That's the text we read before last time.
Yeah. Technically, the land of the Philistines is included in the borders of Israel, but since it was not conclusively conquered until the reign of King David, its status is somewhat lower, etc. And then, so until many generations later, until the reign of King David, see above.
Okay, so it's not so much a punishment for the wicked, although it is that also. But the question of when do the Jewish people take possession of the land of Gerar, of the Philistines? So it turns out that for generations they didn't, right? When Joshua comes in, the time of the judges, the Philistine territory is independent. In fact, not only that, they're a major power that makes life miserable for the Jewish people. So they flourish for quite a bit of time, even though God has given the land to the Jewish people. Nevertheless, the Philistines hold out, and they're very successful in maintaining their position. And it takes a while until finally, in David's time, they are defeated. right? So so now the Zohar says, why did that happen? Why was that historical process working out the way it did? The answer is it's a reward for Avimelech's generosity to Isaac. Because Avimelech was so hospitable and so welcoming to Isaac, therefore he gets to hold on to his land for a longer period of time, right? And what's the verse that they say? Here is my land before you, settle wherever you please. So because Avimelech was willing to let Isaac settle wherever he pleased, there was no need for the Jewish people to take it away by force. Right? Avimelech here says, let's coexist. Let's live together in peace. There's a little problem here textually, as pointed out in the notes, right? That verse comes from chapter 20, which we just read a few minutes ago. That's an Abraham and Sarah verse. That's not an Isaac and Rebekah verse, right? But it is a Gerar verse. It is Avimelech, right? So what the Zohar is doing is thinking historically and ahistorically at the same time, right? It's conflating stories that happened at two very separate times with two very separate people, although the name Avimelech is the same name, right? But it's not the same Avimelech, most probably, and it's certainly not the same Avimelech by the time we get to King David's time, right? So there is a historical process, but there's also an ahistorical process. Because for the Zohar, like I said, the Philistines are by definition wicked. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter how they act. They're guilty until proven innocent. And in this particular case, we have some magnanimity on the part of Avimelech, or more than one Avimelech, that stands them in good stead. So it pushes off for a period of time what they deserve to get, which is their comeuppance. And Israel also needs to be patient, right? I mean, again, if we spend too much time in the symbolic part of evil, the war of evil against good, and so on and so forth, we tend to forget that God's patience and magnanimity to Avimelech for being so magnanimous is at the cost of Israel, right? It's at the cost of real flesh and blood Jewish people who suffered under the Philistine oppression for generations. So there's a dual track of thinking here, but it's not easy to harmonize it, right? It's not easy to harmonize the two, and to make it all, smooth. And this idea that Avimelech was such a good guy here, even if the verses that we have to use to prove that have to be plucked out of context from the Abraham story, now Rabbi Yehuda questions this.
Rabbi Yehuda said, "Woe to the wicked whose kindness is imperfect. Come and see." At first Ephron said, "My lord, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it." But later he said, "Land worth 400 shekels of silver, what is that between me and you?" And it is written, Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver.
One more little line there.
Here too at first is written, "Here my land is before you." But later he said to him, "Go away from us."
Okay. So we have here again a packaging of all kinds of different elements. The story of Ephron and Avraham is not the Egypt story with Abraham and Sarah. It's not the Philistine story with Abraham and Sarah. It's the other story, the story of the burial of Sarah by Abraham. What I wrote the article about, and here we have the Zohar, looking at it at the negotiations with a jaundiced eye, right? Ephron really, first he was being so generous, and then he pulled back. What a slime! what a a crooked guy. Mostly we see this as this is the way everybody understands that that's the way you have to negotiate, and nobody is taken by surprise by that. But here, Rabbi Yehuda says, that's it. Scratch a goy and get a liar and a thief and a crook. So Ephron is, bunched in with all of the other enemies or adversaries, or just plain the fashionable term, others that are not from our group. So Ephron shows that that's the way it is, and Avimelech is no different, and all of these people can't be trusted. And now the proof is, because after all, Avimelech first says, here, live wherever you want, my land is before you. And then he says, go away from us. But it's not the same story, is it? So it is the same story. I'm sorry, my mistake. I'm pushing it too hard. The land, he says the land, no, it is not the same story. Right? I'm getting confused myself. I can't keep all these stories straight. When he says the land is before you, that's Abraham. That's the Abraham story, Avimelech talking to Abraham. Here, when he says, get away, go, that's Avimelech talking to Yitzchak. But it doesn't matter for the Zohar. It's all the same. All the Avimelechs are the same, and all the Jews are the same, right? Abraham is interchangeable with Yitzchak, with Isaac, and Avimelech is interchangeable with Avimelech. Okay, and the idea is basically, again, you cannot trust them. So this is, again, to just be noticed. If we look at the stories themselves, we wouldn't necessarily have to push ourselves to see it that way. Definitely, in the Avimelech Isaac story, there is a change of attitude, and that actually recalls a different story. What's the different story where we have first a welcoming approach, and then resentment and harassment and worse? What's the paradigmatic story for that? The answer is the Jewish people coming down to Egypt in the beginning of the book of Exodus. First, they're very happy. This is at the end of the book of Genesis, right? First, they welcome Joseph's brothers, and they live there for a while, and they do well, and everything is hunky-dory. And then they do too well, and there's the jealousy and the suspicion, and then the backlash or whatever you want to call it, and the oppression begins. So not only is there a kind of a symbolic versus historical reading, there's also a symbolic historical reading that's going on here, right? The stories of the Torah are seen as exemplars of certain forces in the world that will keep on repeating themselves, no matter how different they may be in details. In a general pattern, they're going to be very, very similar. And again, it reinforces the overall narratives that's the word that we use, right? Of basically the problem of the Jewish people living, in the vicinity of powerful neighbors that are not them. Right? So this is constantly eating at the way that the verses are being read. So Rabbi Yehuda is not so willing to grant Avimelech, a gold star for being such a nice guy. He's saying, hey, yeah, maybe in the beginning he was a little nice, but then he changed his colors, and then he showed his true colors, and he kicks out Isaac, right? Expulsion, exile, right? Okay, Rabbi Elazar.
Rabbi Elazar responded, This was kindness toward him, that Avimelech didn't take anything from him, but rather sent him off with all his wealth, and later he followed after him to make a pact with him.
Okay, so what is Rabbi Elazar contributing here? What's his perspective about Avimelech?
He sees him as basically a decent guy.
Right, so we go back, and he's saying, you're looking at the glass half empty. Why don't you look at the glass half full? Look at all the good stuff that he did. And not only that, he kicked him out, but afterwards he comes and he makes a pact with him. He makes a covenant with him. And when he kicked him out, what could he have done? What could he have done? And of course, we know from history again, it could have been much worse.
Could have confiscated everything.
He could have taken everything away from him. He could have said, "I'm really, really angry at you for being such a a usurper, a stranger who's doing so well here. I'm going to nationalize your industry. I'm going to take it all for me." He didn't do that. He just said, "Get out of here. We're not getting along. Go away." Where did we have something similar also in a previous story? That's what Abraham says to Lot. Right? Abraham says to Lot, you know what? We're not getting along. Our shepherds are fighting with each other, just like they do in the Isaac Philistine story. So what does Abraham say? You know what? Go away. Take whatever you want. I'll go the other place. Obviously, Abraham doesn't have a whole kingdom to sit in, but there's a similar disengagement strategy. So what Rabbi Elazar is saying is, why don't you look at the upside here? Why don't you look at how Avimelech did not abuse his power the way he could have? Why don't you give him a little credit? I mean, what we have here is basic dinner table conversation in any knowledgeable Jewish home throughout the ages, right? How jaundiced a view do you have of the goyim? Do you trust them? Do you give them credit when they do something good? Or do you know, oh no, underneath it all, we know exactly what they're trying to do, and we know exactly what they mean and what they feel toward us. And then, the counter arguments, well, look at what he did here. Look at what he did with this. Look at what he did with that. This is, it's all Zohar, and it's all, whatever it is, ancient and sacred. This is basic Jewish political arguments that continue to this very moment, right? So, and if it's in the Zohar, what I would just suggest is that this is not just about having arguments about how you see things. There's a spiritual struggle going on here. I mentioned it, I think, last time also. When we read that verse, there is no fear of God in this place that Abraham said. Do we take that at face value? Or if we read it in the context of the story with a little deeper engagement, we see that actually Abraham was wrong. So which way do we want to have it? Do we want to confirm our, and each one, we can have a bias one way or the other. So if we have a bias not to trust the goyim, if we have a bias not to, allow ourselves to be vulnerable and be part of the bigger world, then it's clear. Never trust them. That they're moral reprobates from the beginning, even when they look like they may try to show themselves to be decent. Never accept it. The other way of reading the story is that this is an object lesson against that very kind of view. Abraham was convinced that Avimelech was no good, and the truth of the matter is that Avimelech was completely God-fearing. Abraham was wrong. Abraham had a prior bias that the story shows was completely actually wrong. But look at the history of how it survives. The way the Zohar brings it up is the Zohar says the idea of no, these guys had no Yirat Elokim, no fear of God. The Zohar accepts that as the truth. Zohar accepts that, hey, that's what the verse says, so it must be true. So the Zohar is a deep reader of the Torah, right? You don't have to take it from me. But deep reading is still subject to what your own desires and convictions are. Your desires and convictions will drive how you're going to dig the well. That's what we're going to come to next. How you're going to dig into the story, what kind of meanings you will discover, somewhat to be determined by what kind of meanings you want to discover. What kind of meanings are you looking for? All right, somebody wanted to say something before and I stopped them, I think. Anybody going once, twice? Okay, here we go.
Rabbi Elazar said further, Isaac acted fittingly, for since he knew mysteries of wisdom, he endeavored and dug a well of water to fortify himself fittingly in faith. Abraham endeavored and dug a well of water. Isaac, following him, endeavored and dug a well of water. Jacob found it prepared and sat down by it. They all went striving after it to fortify themselves fittingly in perfect faith.
Okay, so this is the same Rabbi Elazar who says, let's give credit where credit is due. Avimelech is a person who's done a number of pretty good things, or not as bad as you're trying to make him out. And then he says, okay, but let's forget about Avimelech. What is Isaac's response to his encounter with Avimelech after Avimelech, while he's living in Avimelech's territory? What does he end up doing? He keeps digging wells. He keeps digging wells. In the Torah story, he digs wells when he's very prosperous, and that's what brings the Philistine populace to start hating him and being jealous, and they start stopping up the wells. And then what does Avimelech say? Avimelech says, you're too much for us, right? Atzamta mimeno. So you're too great for us. Go, get out of here, right? Is Avimelech expelling Isaac because he hates him? Is Avimelech expelling Isaac to punish him? Is Avimelech trying to be mean to him? So one possible answer, of course, is yes. Avimelech is, in the end, he's still a Philistine. He's still going to persecute the Jews. But Rabbi Elazar says, well, what kind of persecution did he do here? He didn't take away all of his assets and so on, right? And then afterwards, he actually comes and says, no, let's be ba'alei brit. Let's all have a covenant together. So did he hate him? Well, Isaac says that, right? He says, what are you coming to me here? You've always hated me. So that's, again, Isaac's perception, or Isaac's rhetorical question, labels Avimelech as an enemy, as someone who hated him. But it's possible to read it a little differently, isn't it? What's another option that we can read Avimelech's decision as? He's saving Isaac from the harassment of the population. He's saying, you know what? It's better for you to move on, because these people are going to constantly cause trouble. And remember what Avimelech said before. He said, what are you doing here? You're hanging out here. You're lying to us about what your marital situation is. What if one of the people actually decides to come and abduct Rebecca? So Avimelech's worry could be about the fact that I cannot control all of these people. They're basically, going to be okay until they get a bug in their bonnet, and then they're going to act in a way that's going to be ugly, and I really cannot guarantee your safety. So go, get out of here. That's why he doesn't take his property. That's why he doesn't take all his sheep and all his valuables and so on. Saying it's better for you to go because I can't protect you. How true that was, how much effort he could have put into it, okay, I don't know. But that's a possible way to read it. And that's when, in the end, Avimelech comes back to him when he sees that Isaac is able to sustain himself without being bothered, right? That's when Avimelech comes back, after they dig wells that nobody is bothering him about. So, who knows? Maybe Avimelech is not the biggest villain. But what do then the wells mean here? For the Zohar, we go now from the physical, from the material, into the spiritual. The same struggle that I talked about in the Torah Sparks. What do the wells convey here for the Zohar? What is this effort all about? What is it telling us? What's Isaac trying to do? Well, it says it. It says it somewhat clearly, right? To fortify himself fittingly, right, in faith. That's the digging of the well. The digging of the well has nothing to do with getting water for his flocks or for himself. Digging the well means digging into spiritual depths in order to be able to fortify, to strengthen himself in his devotion to God. So it's a symbolic, spiritual meaning. But let's again understand it. So why does Isaac do this at this point? Why does Isaac need to fortify himself? Isaac is with Rebekah.
Could it be because he's just been in a land of depravity, as it were, and so he needs to work his way back up to his rung?
Okay, so the effect of the Philistine sojourn, did it bring him down? Did it weaken his spiritual stature? And now he needs to rebuild himself? That seems to be a fair reading. He's not quite out of the neighborhood, right? Even though he has distanced himself from Avimelech, he's not under Avimelech's window. Avimelech can't look through his window and see Isaac anymore. But nevertheless, he's still in that same territory, and he's coping with the outside world, right? And he's coping with what does it mean to be in constant interaction with that world. He keeps digging wells, they keep getting stopped up, then he moves on, he digs another well. Finally, he's able to get a well that nobody's going to bother him on. But in a spiritual sense, what does that mean? What's bothering him? So we could say what's bothering him is the lure of the demonic, right? The Philistines are bad. They represent evil. Evil is always enticing. That's what the job is of Abraham, as it says. Abraham had to dig wells. Isaac has to dig wells, because the evil is always lurking there to seduce and to get you to lose your footing. But it's complicated. That's what we have as the run up into this part. Is Avimelech so evil? Is he really so bad? Is that the seduction, to think that maybe he's not as bad as what people say? To see some goodness in Avimelech, is that the trickery of the evil one, or is it not that way, but the other way? Is it really hard to maintain one's own faith when you don't have to make it dependent on everything black and white? If your faith is good and the rest of the world sucks, then it's easier to maintain your faith, because your faith is the only good shining light in the world. But what if there's actually some other goodness out there? What if there actually is some other fear of God that's out there? Then what's the point of your faith in opposition to that other fear of God? Maybe it's not so necessary to be so staunch about holding on to your faith. What's so bad? Everybody's good. If the person's a good person, so isn't that what counts? Look at Avimelech. He's not one of us. He's capable of an act of generosity, of gentleness, of protection, of integrity. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe what Isaac has to do to fortify his faith is because the lure is not the lure of the wicked. It's the lure of an other good. Maybe that's what's going on here. I mean, this is Rabbi Elazar, who said, hey, Avimelech was okay. Nevertheless, says Rabbi Elazar, what Yitzchak did was necessary and fitting. It was appropriate for him to dig deeper into his own wells, not to just give up and join the other group. And that's what the other group gets furious about. Not necessarily Avimelech, but why don't they just want to join along? What is the point? What is the point of digging your well, only your well? I mean, let's imagine again, it's an environment where wells are necessary. Right? Wells are life. You don't have a well, you're going to die. Your flocks are going to die, your crops are going to die. You know what? That doesn't apply only to Isaac. That applies to the Philistines also. So what are the Philistines doing? Are they just simply stopping up these wells and they're going to decide to die of thirst and starvation? They need wells, so they have wells.
When somebody digs a well, is it shared? Is the water shared?
So that's an excellent question. I don't know, sociologically, anthropologically, how these things work in traditional societies. But what I'm imagining is whatever wells Isaac is digging, they're not the only wells in the area, because obviously everybody else is living. So there are other wells. So is Isaac digging his wells because the Philistines are not letting him use his wells, letting him use their wells? So he has to dig his wells. And then not only that, to put, evil on top of evil, then they stop up his own wells. Well, that would be pretty awful. That would be pretty awful. It doesn't quite say that, but it does, it's enigmatic. It says they keep on stopping up his wells until they stop. Until they don't do it. Then they don't. Then they don't stop up the wells. So they get tired of it, or they reconcile to themselves that, okay, you know what? The guy's really stubborn. He's hung on. Let him dig his own wells if that's what he wants. And then that's when they make peace. All of this is completely speculative. All of this is completely, I'm wondering about it as I'm going along. There's one more thing that we should try to understand here. Abraham digs wells. Isaac digs wells. Jacob doesn't have to dig wells. Jacob just comes upon the well, right? And that's the well, of course, where he finds his beloved Rachel, right? So again, we have in the Zohar, and it's going to come down later, the Zohar will make this discussion. It's based on Midrashim. The well motif in the Torah is a well-known motif. And and it comes at least one more time. When is that? We've got it with the patriarchs and the matriarchs. When we've got with Isaac, we've got the Jacob one. Where else?
Moses.
Moses.
Right, Moses and Zipporah. Right, Moses and the daughters of Yitro. So that's another well story. So the Zohar is going to have a whole discussion about this is the same well over and over and over again. It's the same well. Right, historically conflating it, geographically conflating it, because a well is a well. It's not about a well. It's about something else. But then how do we understand this something else? What does it mean to say that Jacob didn't have to dig his own wells? Certainly, we've already had enough of a taste of the fact that Jacob has to fight with Esau. So it's not simply a question of if you're engaging with evil, you need to keep on fortifying yourself by digging the well, because he's also engaging in evil. And yet, the Zohar is saying, you know what? He didn't have to do that fortifying. So how does the Zohar understand that? How do we understand the Zohar's understanding?
Somehow Jacob inherits the faith that Abraham and Isaac spent so much effort obtaining. Jacob inherits it.
Precisely. In Pirkei Avot, right? In the fundamental teachings that the sages put forth, there's a place where they say that don't think that just because other people in your family have learned Torah, that you don't have to learn Torah. They go, no, you have to learn Torah on your own. She'ena Yerushalach. You can't be inherited. You can't inherit Torah. You have to do your own learning of Torah, which makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, we know culturally, economically, for sure, in so many ways, growing up in a certain home environment makes a huge difference in how you then approach your own efforts and your own well digging or your own studying of Torah. And if you grow up in a house where everybody's studying Torah, right, where you can be raised by sages who are constantly involved in that, you've got a leg up from somebody who has to discover the Torah all by themselves. It doesn't mean that in the end that other person may not exceed what you're doing, but you have a cushion. What if you live in a home that is suffused with religious faith? You're gonna imbibe that with your mother's milk. You're going to take that in, with the air that you breathe. So what Craig is saying is, I think what the Zohar understands, not just on this kind of like mundane physical level or sociological level, but Yaakov, of course, is the harmonization of Abraham and Isaac. Right? Yaakov is the one who brings these two, different, very different religious types. He brings them into harmony. He benefits from the struggles that his grandfather and that his father have experienced and have fought so hard to win. He derives great sustenance from their fighting. When we make a blessing in the morning, traditionally, about Torah, studying Torah, there are three blessings that we say. The last one is the same blessing that we say when we get an aliyah. Right? Thank God you chose us and you gave us this wonderful gift. You are so generous to us. You abound in blessings. You give the Torah. But before that, we have other blessings. Right? The first blessing is what's called the Birkat HaMitzvah, right? Which means a blessing that you recite before you're about to do a sacred act. And that is, God, you abound in blessings, you sanctified us with your commandments, and you commanded us to work hard at Torah. La'asok b'divrei Torah. Right? The word asek is used in this text that you just read about this conflict and this fighting and this working hard with the neighbors. We're supposed to fight hard with the words of the Torah. Then after that, and that's because we're about to start a new day and we're going to start learning Torah. Right after that, we say, "Ha'arevna Hashem Elokeinu et divrei Torah chavafinu, v'fi amcha beit Yisrael v'nei anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzaei amcha beit Yisrael," or sometimes v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzaei tzetzaenu v'tzetzaei amcha beit Yisrael, lo niyodei shemecha lomdei Torah sach lishma, v'chato Hashem hamalamei Torah li'amo Yisrael. So this is a prayer. It's not a birkat mitzvah. It's not, okay, you've sanctified us to do the commandment, I'm ready to do the commandment. This is a prayer. And it says, God, make the words of Torah the ha'arevna. Now the word ha'arevna can be explained in many different ways. The simplest way is, let it be sweet. Let it be pleasant and sweet. Let these words that we're going to work so hard to try to come to grips with, to try to understand, we're commanded to do that. We're accepting that commandment. Now, can you make it sweet for us? And if you make it sweet for us, then v'nihiyeh anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzaei tzetzaenu v'tzetzaei amcha beit Yisrael. The word tzetzaenu means offspring. It means the ones that come later, the ones that come out of us, our posterity. Let our offspring and the offspring of our offspring and the offspring of later from all of the of the people of Israel, let them all have intimate connection with you. So one way to read this is, we hope that we'll love the Torah, and we hope that they'll love the Torah, and we hope that the next generation will love the Torah. And of course, that's the simple understanding. But one other way, based on this Zohar picture that we have here, is if we find the Torah sweet, so sweet, that will somehow seep in to the milk that our babies will suckle. If we, and if the mother eats certain foods, that goes into the milk. If we find the Torah sweet enough, then maybe that's going to get passed down to the next generation, and then to the next generation. So that's what we have here with the Zohar's picture of Jacob. Yes, on a spiritual, metaphysical level, he represents that next step that unifies and harmonizes the two. But on a family level, and we should know, of course, that we know this chronologically, he lives with Abraham still being alive. He has some kind of chronological overlap. We have no idea about the relationship, but he has a chronological overlap with his grandfather and obviously with his father. From the Zohar's perspective, he's living in the tents of Torah. Right? He's living in that environment where he's just seeping in the faith. He's seeping in this connection that his parents and grandparents had to fight for, because they weren't him. They weren't that next step in the generations. They had to fight for it themselves. And then he benefited from that fight. So, all right, that's where we'll be able to, and then they all went striving after it to fortify themselves fittingly in perfect faith. And we'll get next time to how this plays out with future generations down to our own time. Okay, any last comments that anybody wants to share, make?
Yasher koach.
Okay. Yasher koach. Good night, everyone. All right. Sei gesund.